Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for joining us for the Utah League of Cities and Towns Board of Directors meeting for Monday, November 16th. I appreciate everybody's time and effort to be here today. Thank you all very much. We have a couple of administrative items we'll jump into. First is the reading and determination regarding conducting the ULCT public meetings without anchor location. So just quickly to read through that determination of the Utah League of Cities and Towns regarding public meetings without an anchor location. Pursuant to Utah Code Section 59-2-407, the President of the Utah League of Cities and Towns hereby determines that conducting an electronic meeting with an anchor location presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who may be present at the anchor location. This determination is based on the November 8th, 2020 declaration by the Governor of the State of Utah regarding the increase in COVID-19 cases and the need for caution in people meeting together. The November 16th, 2020 meeting of the Utah League of Cities and Towns Board of Directors will be held electronically and will not have a physical location. All attendees will connect remotely, and links for public participation are available on the Utah Public Notice website. Thank you. Does that cover it, Cam?
Yep, we do need a vote to approve that. Correct, Raj?
Yeah, although the law says the president can declare it, but it's probably a good idea.
Okay, with that, do we have a motion?
Clint Smith, all motion to approve.
Did we get those?
Yep, it looks like we have Mayor Silvestrini with the motion and Councilmember Smith with the second.
Correct. Okay. Motion is second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, that passes. Thank you very much. Up next, we have review and approval of minutes and a call for conflict of interest disclosure. Has anybody had a chance to review the minutes, and would they be willing to make a motion?
Mr. Chair, Clint Smith, just one addition. I don't think it had me listed as an attendee at our last meeting, but I was present for that one. So just a minor correction there.
Okay, with that, would you make a motion to approve?
I would make a motion to approve with that single amendment.
I second. This is Jewel.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a first and a second for the minutes. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Those pass. Thank you for that correction. Do we have anybody that would like to declare a conflict of interest? Okay. Hearing none. Are we okay to move on to 3, Cam? I have preferred contact
Yes, we are
info
with-
survey on the agenda. I don't know exactly what that is.
Yep, it's just that at our December board meeting, we will be sending you all a small gift, a treat. So we are asking for your contact info of which address you would like us to send that treat to for the December meeting, and then making sure we have updated contact info for all board members. So the link is there in the board document, and we'll send a follow-up email after this meeting.
Perfect. Thank you very much. That will bring us to number 3, Board of Directors membership update. Mayor Ramsey.
Mayor Caldwell, I should clarify too that Mayor Ramsey was finishing this because she was the second vice president during the membership process this year. She is now the first vice president, but was wrapping up this duty. Mayor Ramsey was going to be joining the call, but notified me she'd be a couple minutes late. So let me go ahead and just take it for her, if that's all right.
Perfect. Yep.
So we had a vacancy with Region 6, which includes the counties of Paiute County, Wayne County, Sanpete County, Sevier County, Miller County, and Juab County. We also had a vacancy for our town representative, and that's because Mayfield Mayor John Christensen filled both spots for us over the last 2 years. Mayor Christensen notified me a couple of weeks ago that he was stepping down as mayor of Mayfield because he, for health reasons, needed to move closer to a hospital and has since relocated to St. George. Some of you may recall that over a year ago, Mayor Christensen had a close call with death. He was in a coma and in intensive care for many days, and I was one of the first people to talk to him when he came out of the coma miraculously. And we're fortunate that he's still here. Unfortunately, he's no longer able to serve as mayor, and so that's why he had to resign from the league board. His father, Chesley Christensen, was a 5-term mayor of Mount Pleasant. I knew his father when I started at the league. In fact, Mayor Caldwell, the seat that you now sit in at LPC was the seat that Mayor Christensen's father, Chesley, sat in when I first started at the league. So you are carrying on that tradition. But I wanted to acknowledge that that's why Mayor Christensen has to step down. And then Mayor Ramsey followed up with Eureka Mayor Nick Castleton, who expressed his interest in serving on the board. And Mayor Castleton, you are on the call, correct?
I am here.
Excellent. Do you want to take 30 seconds to introduce yourself to the board before Mayor Caldwell, we ask for a vote?
Well, I'm mayor of Eureka. I've been mayor for about 7 years now. I was born and raised in Eureka, very northern part of the Juab County. And I've been invited to several things from Utah League of Cities and Towns and think they're doing a great job and willing to step in and do what I can to help it be a great organization.
Thank you, Mayor Castleton. And so everybody knows Mayor Castleton throughout his time as mayor has frequently given us feedback on legislation and has contributed and been a great voice thus far. And so Mayor Ramsey's recommendation as chair of the nominations committee in September, Mayor Caldwell, is to appoint Mayor Castleton to fill those dual roles within the board of directors.
Well, we'd certainly like to thank Mayfield Mayor John Christensen for his service. He's done a great job as a good friend of many here. So we want to appreciate that and want to thank Mayor Castleton for his willingness to serve. So with that, do we have a motion to appoint?
Mr. Chair, Jeff Silvestrini, I'll make a motion to appoint Mayor Castleton to the position.
Dustin White, second.
Thank you. We have a first and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Do you have any opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you very much. And welcome to the board, Mayor Castleton. We look forward to working with you.
Thank you. Appreciate it very much.
I will say these are a lot easier to attend in Zoom than they were in person. We appreciate those in remote areas that made the long drives in and the commitment to be with us. So we don't know how long this will last, but we do appreciate your being willing to serve, and thank you very much. Can we have board vacancy appointment memo as a handout? Do you need us to do anything with that?
Nope, that'll be at the end.
Okay, great. Up next, we have Utah League of Cities and Towns website unveiling. Susan Wood, Director of Communications. Thank you, Susan.
Thanks, Mayor. About a year ago, you may remember if you were on the board then that the board approved funding for a new website. So now it's up and running and we wanted you to take a look. And if I could share my screen, let's see, looks like I can. Oh, I just don't know how to do this very well. So let's see. Can you see it, Nick? Anybody?
I can see it.
Nailed it.
Okay, great. So this is what it looks like now. We're so excited. What we did is we did a lot of research and figured out what it is that people are going to our website for. We used a heat map and some other methods to determine that. And then what it is that we want our website to be for. You'll see this bar at the top that has member services, advocacy, conferences, and training. And those are several of the categories that a lot of what we do falls into. Then you'll see this beautiful image right below it. About 8 months ago, we sent out an email to all cities asking for some of your best photographs. And with our goal being that we'll highlight the cities and the beauty that exists therein. And so we have a bunch in the queue to rotate. And I'm going to see if I can move through this. You'll see a little arrow on the side that will rotate through all the wonderful things to do and the things to see with little locators in the bottom corner. So we're excited to be rolling through that as the weeks go by with all the photos that you've sent, and hopefully we'll be getting some more too. If you scroll down a little bit, oh, then there's also this little spot where we could put up bulletins to access registration for a conference or other resources or other trainings that we have. Then these tabs right here link to some of the other important information that people are coming to our website for and that we want to share. We've got a really great bill tracking widget in the works. It's not quite there yet, but it should be there in time for the session to begin. And land use takes people directly to the Land Use Academy of Utah website. Then let's scroll down into this, what's called a home spotlight area. Right now, a lot of people are looking for COVID-19 information. So we've got that front and center and probably will be keeping it there for a little while. But you'll also see other information, videos that we've got, the opener from the league annual convention, which was a lot of fun. Just information about Loveless and Lead, meet the board members. So anyway, it's a nice way to highlight some of the information that we're doing that we also feature in the Spotlight segment in Friday Facts and through our social media. Then scrolling down a bit more, you'll find events, including the board meeting going on right now and LPC later this afternoon, and league news. You'll see that right here we have the City's Work podcast, which was just released on Friday. And thanks to Mayor Mendenhall from Salt Lake City, we have a little podcast on the windstorm impact from last September and the recovery efforts that are going on right now. If you click on that, it takes you to all of the podcasts that we've done, and you'll see windstorm right there. You'll also see at the bottom, you can subscribe to all of these. We would encourage you to listen and see what you think, or at least subscribe, and then you can listen on your terms whenever you've got time. iTunes, Google Play. All right, let's go back. And by the way, thanks, Mayor. I hope you liked it. Then if you scroll down a little bit more, you'll see more news. That has kind of like an archive of everything that we've posted in that news segment, including links to videos or other resources. And at the very bottom, some demographics. And we thought about calling this by the numbers, or we'll probably come up with some other catchy phrase, but it just basically scrolls through the numbers of interesting tidbits about Utah cities and towns, and then our contact information at the bottom. So in the Spotlight segment, we're going, or in the news segment, whichever works best, we're going to be featuring a couple of things. Several of you offered to help with a Utah policy feature. It's like a little Q&A. And this week, coming up any day now, they're going to be running a Q&A that we did on just the 3 surprises that your city has faced since COVID broke out. So watch for that. We're also going to be doing Utah policy Q&A features on a couple of other issues that we will be addressing. Let's see if I can find in my notes. Oh, trust in policing is one that we'll be talking about in depth, housing and growth issues. Also, many of you saw Thomas Wright's op-eds in the Desert News on housing. We will address housing issues in LPC this afternoon. So at 3 o'clock, we'll be discussing that more in depth and determining how we are going to respond to that. We definitely want to formulate a response, and so we'll wait to hear what some of your thoughts are in LPC. And basically the goal was to make it clear, easy to use, and to make it attractive, and also feature some of the beautiful places throughout Utah, throughout our cities and towns. So there you go. Hope you like it and find it useful.
Thank you. I think it looks fantastic. And I've seen that in the comments as well in the chat box. So great work on that.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions or comments they want to add before we move on?
You did a great job. It's incredibly user-friendly. I love that you use the heat map and that it's just targeting the things that people are going to be used. I think it's going to make it more friendly for our cities and people that are joining in and becoming leaders and representatives. It's fantastic. Great job.
Thank you, Mayor Fulmer.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, that will take us to number 5, advocacy, engagement, and outreach update. Victoria.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's good to be with all of you today. I'm going to put up on my screen our policy tiers, which were included in your packet, although I think we've got one change from what was in your packet. So let me just get this up bigger so you can see it. Okay, so for those of you who were not on the board in the spring, we adopted this tier system to do two things. One is to help us keep track of all the different policy issues we as ULCT staff are working on, and also to help prioritize those based on your input. And so we've been presenting the tiers at each meeting. We have a few changes at this meeting for you to ratify. The changes from last meeting are in green. And I want to be clear that some of these changes are just more detail on issues. They're not necessarily new, but they've been compacted into other issues on previous tiers, while other issues are new. And those that we've kind of expanded are the land use task force, what they've been working on, for example, they've been working on low impact design and canal easements and some of these other things throughout the year. And so we just want to itemize those, and same with the public safety issues. Some of the newer issues that we've added are fireworks, the homeless coordinator, legal notice. This has come up with the Tribune and the Deseret News going to online publication, strictly online, and emergency authority. And so we're putting this in front of you today to ratify that we've added these policy issues for our ULCT staff to work on. And then our next step is we intend to send out a survey in the next few weeks, writing up a little bit more information on each of these issues, but then having you give us your priorities, whether or not we've got tier 1 right, tier 2, tier 3, and really trying to narrow down our focus. As you can see, tier 1 alone, which is our highest and most immediate tier, has a lot of issues in it. And so we really need your feedback as we head into session as to where to put our limited resources in advocacy. And there will probably be more issues that come at us as the bills get numbered for session. On the advocacy front, we want to call your attention to the housing issues, fees, the land use authority issues, and police. There's been a lot of buzz about affordable housing and the crisis that the state is facing and what city roles are in it. As many of you know, SB 34 was passed a few years ago, asking cities to look at their moderate income housing plans. We are still getting a lot of push that cities need to take even a bigger role, whether that's limiting or directing our zoning authority or other land use authority. There's also been a lot of talk about fees and their role in the affordability of housing. And as you know, there's been a lot of work on public safety and police. And so those are kind of the big issues we're seeing right now, but there are lots of elements to those as well. As you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, housing has a lot of different policy points that have been discussed. So we want to keep those on your radar because we are stressing the urgency of our members, which includes you board members in particular, to help us advocate. This session is going to be it's going to be a wild ride. We have been informed that the Capitol is not allowing people to have events at the Capitol, so we will not be able to have local officials day at the Capitol. And that's always a great day for us to bring all of you and students and legislators together. We are unable to do that this year. We're also unclear right now as to whether or not your legislative team will be able to be at the Capitol. I've heard publicly the legislators say that the Capitol will be open for business by then. I have heard staff privately say that they're preparing for an online session. We have been told that we should have more information in the next few weeks, but our advocacy is really going to be challenged if we are in an all virtual world. And we are really going to have to rely on the strength of the league, which is we have this huge army to reach out to all 104 legislators, but we really need the Army's help doing that. And so we will be stressing that in LPC today. We stressed it last time, and we are asking that from you today to reach out to your existing legislators, or if you've had new legislators come online in this last election, to really get to know them, talk to them about these housing, public safety, fee issues, and to make it clear that you have a good relationship with them, so that when these bills pop up during session, they're ready to listen to you and kind of get through all the noise that we're going to be experiencing during session. So that's what I have. Cam, I don't know if you want to add anything else. So we are looking for a ratification of the tiers. And then let's see, a few questions.
Yeah, Victoria.
Yes, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Victoria.
So there's a question of whether or not the tiers were emailed. I think they were in the board packet, with the one difference that it did not include the homeless coordinator over there in tier 3, but everything else is in your packet. And Nick said he'll send it out as a follow-up, so we'll have the updated one.
Yeah, the follow-up email will also have a survey for you to individually chime in, which will be helpful for us, because even just today, I've had a couple more legislators reach out about this bill or that bill that we're not even on the tier list, but they're looking for feedback, which is pretty common. And we've been told that they are all, the legislature's already at pace to exceed the number of bills that they've had the last couple of years. And that's without the freshmen even running their bills yet. So as usual, we'll have a hyperactive legislature with lots of bills and a lot of focus on local government. And because we have to cancel Local Officials Day and not have in-person LPCs at the Capitol, we are sounding the alarm that we all need to do our part in these next few weeks to make sure we have those open lines of communication. To that end, Mayor Caldwell, in addition to a motion to adopt the tiers for now, we also need to reschedule the January board meeting, which normally occurs on Local Officials Day. Because of the passage of Amendment F, the legislature is now starting the day after Martin Luther King Day rather than the week after Martin Luther King Day. So it'll start on Tuesday, January 19th. And so we're proposing to you a board meeting on Wednesday, January 20th, which would be day 2 of the session. We would do it during the lunch hour. We do not usually hold LPC the first week of the session because of Local Officials Day, but we would replace that with the board meeting that Wednesday, January 2nd. So Mayor Caldwell, those are the 2 action items.
You sure you don't want an action item of just canceling the session due to COVID-19?
All in favor?
Mayor Caldwell, I have a quick question.
Shoot.
This is Julie Fulmer. The people that are pushing back on the housing, were they connecting it to transportation at all, or incentives with transportation, or is that something that we would have to push back on? I feel like housing is a continual discussion that comes down, and there's a lot of requests for cities to plan for housing and opening zoning and changing things, but not a lot of discussion goes into the integration of what that means for the transportation and the connection to those houses.
So, Meg and Carson have worked on housing a lot, so I'm happy to defer to them. There has been some discussion about that, but from my perspective, it has not actually risen to the top. The fee discussion has really been a top one. For a while, public infrastructure districts were being talked about as a tool to help get costs down. This new concept that came through the Commission on Housing Affordability on housing reinvestment zones has kind of caught a lot of attention with little detail. And that could potentially tie into some transportation depending on the kind of reinvestment zone you're looking at. But I don't know that the transportation part has really received as much attention as some of those other things. Carson and Meg or Cam, if you want to chime in on that.
Yeah, let me jump in there, Mayor Fulmer. Part of the underlying foundation of SB 34 was to say that a city, in order to be eligible for state transportation investment fund dollars, needed to have an updated moderate income housing plan. every city met that requirement. And in December is when you have to submit your first report card on how you've been compliant with SB 34. There's been a lot of discussion, and actually I've chatted with a couple of property owners and their representatives in Vineyard about how do we address the need for additional parking structures and tiered parking around transit, and how do you maximize the potential housing units and have a low income and moderate income component in housing units around transit. So the issue probably one of the issues you're familiar with there in Vineyard is being discussed. As Victoria stated, it's kind of scattered right now. You have lots of people throwing out lots of different ideas. We're going to do a deeper dive at LPC on this so that we can get some good feedback from the membership. And then the plan was to bring back some concepts once they're a little less scattered to the board in December.
Okay, I think that one of the things that we should bring forward, and I have no problem putting a motion through to just get our tiers approved, but I do think that something that we need to be aware of is as a city that's been putting a lot of these things forward and building from the ground up and making sure that these housing structures are being met, there's a lot of unintended consequences that come from this type of zoning that is being requested. And it's not only isolated to transit, but even within our Department of Transportation, if you're, like, for instance, I had a recent meeting with Region 3. For the last couple of years, we've had these meetings. And I'll show them my plans for development. And they'll say, well, you do know that if you're developing for that amount of housing, you're going outside of our projected plans at UDOT. And so you're not going to be able to get the roads that you need to move those people through. But this is the type of the housing that the state is asking and requiring that our cities start paying attention to. And there's also a lot of cities that, unlike my city, don't fall along transportation corridors or transit corridors. And to open up zoning in a way that doesn't allow them to move those people in and out. I think we need to be aware of this as we start having these discussions going forward, and make sure that those silos between transportation, transit, and housing start coming together, and that we are really, really considering regionally how this is affecting individual cities that don't necessarily fall along the same paths that my city falls along. So,
Mr. Chair, if I could tag on to Julie's comment a little bit and just insert that I've had similar conversations with Rocky Mountain Power with regard to their future planning and the actuality of housing development that's happening in parts of our city not fitting into their concept of what the future looks like. And in some cases, we find that the power grid is becoming a limiting factor. So I know that it's a little bit aside, but those are a couple of institutions that are on the same track in that way.
yeah, good point. But I'm happy to make the motion to approve the tiers as well.
Okay, we'll accept that. Thank you. Is there a second?
Jeff Silvestrini, I'll second it.
Thank you, Mayor. And I think as we've talked about this throughout, as the legislative session starts, this is a fluid document. So we appreciate the starting point, and it will probably change as we go forward. So we have a first and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Are there any opposed? Hearing none, that passes. Thank you. Up next, we have the change in meeting date that Cameron had mentioned. We need a motion to accept that change.
Clint Smith, motion to approve.
Michelle Randall will second it.
Thank you. We have a first and second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, that passes. Thank you very much, everybody, for the conversation. Up next, we have the Love, Listen, and Lead. Cameron, you're on. And former President Mendenhall.
Terrific. Thank you, Mayor Caldwell. And we will get calendar invites out for that January meeting. to reschedule it based on what's already in your calendar. So thank you for that. And Victoria, thanks for all of the work. One other quick thing I should note on Local Officials Day, because we're canceling it, that will actually help our bottom line because we lose money on Local Officials Day every year. So it's part of the fluidity of the budget situation of this year. So we lose that powerful advocacy show of force, but we also are able to save some money. So that's why we're working to mitigate the advocacy side. Speaking of the advocacy side, Councilmember Mendenhall, I'll let you give a brief review of the task force, and we have several task force members that have joined us on the call here today, and then we'll introduce Kyrene Gibb and her team.
Thanks, Cameron. I think most everybody on this call has known that the meetings of the Love, Listen, and Lead task force have taken place this last few months. Maybe what you don't know is it has met twice monthly. I can tell you those discussions have been fantastic. Just to sum it up in a word, eye-opening on a lot of aspects for myself, but you know, just I guess what comes away from me about those meetings has been what we all experience as elected officials when you have positive experiences working with your citizens. The more input, the more data, and the more discussion that happens on especially tough issues like this seem to yield better results. And so just first and foremost, I want to thank Cameron and everybody that's facilitated these discussions and these meetings. And frankly, I'm excited for the you know, the recommendations that you'll hear to the board that again speaks to how important it is for us as local elected officials to be involved in these discussions that obviously take place in each one of our cities, because that's each of our cities have public safety responsibility, of course, at the top of our mind. With that, I just want to introduce Kyrene Gibb of Y2 Analytics. She's Vice President of Research for Y2, and just a quick plug for them, how important they've been for the league, but also how important they've been in my city, in Spanish Fork. We've used them on a couple of different occasions, and just grateful for their research, for the good work that they do in gathering data for us. And this meeting, the meetings that have happened, has been not only you know, attended by elected officials, mayors, and council members across the state, but you should know this lovely Listen and Lead task force, you know, has been with police chiefs, attorneys, and several city managers across the state. So it's just been a great cross-section of people in different roles and from different viewpoints, all coming together and discussing what obviously will be discussed in the legislative session this year. So with that, Cameron, unless you want to add anything to that, is it time to turn it over to Kyrene to talk about the data?
Yep, I'll take 30 seconds to thank Kyrene and her team for the work over the last few months. As of Friday night, there are 73 bill files open that have to do with law enforcement, criminal justice at the Capitol. Those are just the public ones. What we acknowledged way back in June at the June board meeting is that before you can jump to potential policy solutions, you need to acknowledge and understand the underlying problem and the underlying concerns. And that's why we contracted with Y2. The league paid for half of the survey research. The other half came from steering committee members that Kyrene will reference, but particularly I want to thank Ogden City and Salt Lake City as league board members. We oversampled in their cities and they contributed financially as well to make sure we could have the scope of the survey that we needed. From day one, we've been trying to find the space of supporting our officers and ensuring community safety, as well as finding areas where we can improve to ensure trust in police. While Kyrene presents the public survey data, You heard Mike reference that the task force has been meeting. They've not yet made any official recommendations. We've been having lots of terrific discussions, and the time for recommendations is coming as potentially as soon as this Thursday afternoon when the task force meets again, and we'll be looking at a couple of bills that the legislature is considering this week. But Kyrene will be going through some really insightful survey data. I saw it this morning for the first time, and frankly, we could spend 24 hours going through all of it. So I'll stop so she can get into it. She has some colleagues who are on the call. If you have questions about the data, our initial request is to put those questions in the chat room, and either her colleagues or I will try to answer them initially, or Kyrene can say, actually, I can take this one, and she can work it into her conversation with you. So Kyrene, take it away. Oh, I should also note, we are not distributing this publicly. We acknowledge this is a public meeting. There could be a reporter who's watching, but we're not yet ready to share this data publicly because, again, it's hot off the virtual presses as of this morning.
Thank you, Cam. Yes, very hot off the virtual presses. We are actually still in the process of data analysis. There's a lot of really fascinating and nuanced data to dig through here. So we're going to present a few high-level findings just to give you a taste of what we're working with here and some of the things that really stood out to us as we were consolidating this and working on ensuring that the data that we have are addressing the objectives of the League Board and the steering committee members. I'm going to share my screen here. And I'll go ahead and dive into things. So a quick overview of our process and methodology. You all have heard from me a couple times at this point, or most of you have. So I'll be brief in terms of the process that we've undergone, but I do want to give a special recognition and thank you to our Love, Listen, and Lead steering committee members who have made this work possible. I think it's significant and timely, and I feel fortunate to be involved, as do my colleagues, in such a critical juncture as we are thinking about how to both support our law enforcement officers and ensure the highest level of trust and equity as we're serving our local communities. I also have our just key objectives for this research up on the screen here. So as we were thinking about an approach to go over this in the public opinion sphere, and examine community trust in law enforcement and appetite for potential reform, or what areas we can identify where there may be trust gaps and where we might want to improve our service for the benefit of all of our residents and the strength of our communities. And of course, keeping in mind the need as public servants to be supporting not just those who elected us, but also those who work to secure our safety each day. The things that we really wanted to focus on here, we're measuring the current state of public knowledge and opinion about law enforcement, and especially as that relates to systemic racism and how that interplays with public safety in Utah. Understanding the contours of the logical and emotional values that drive Utahns' opinions, and then examining the tensions expressed here. So we understand that we have a significantly not quite uniform community in Utah, but there's certainly a significant majority. And our communities of color and our racially and ethnically diverse communities have historically been marginalized in a lot of these discussions. So we wanted to make sure that we were looking at and carefully examining the tensions that display themselves between public opinion among our communities of color throughout the state and our overwhelmingly white voter community in Utah, keeping in mind that both of these populations have valid opinions, both of these populations are taxpayers. We serve all of these people, and we want to make sure that we are treating them equitably and that we understand the disparity in perceptions among these groups. That's helpful context for us. And then the fourth objective here was to discover areas where public opinion might reveal potential inroads or meaningful policy changes. Our role here is not to recommend any policy prescriptions, to be sure. We wanted to examine public opinion and the potential appetite or support for a variety of options. And we'll get into a little bit more of that. But I think it's important to consider that what we're presenting here is a snapshot of current opinions and perceptions and shouldn't be considered a mandate or something that should tie elected officials' hands or dictate the decisions that are made, but rather just another tool in the tool belt as you're moving forward and continuing to consider the nuance that comes with policymaking. So hopefully the data that we have here can be of service in that regard. I'll give a quick overview of a few of the sections that we have here and then move through to the more detailed data. But probably unsurprisingly to most of us on this call, Utahns generally feel safe in their communities. Only 7% of respondents statewide said that they indicated feeling somewhat or very unsafe. That is a fantastic measure of the quality of the communities that we've built here. And on average, most Utahns trust their local police officers, but there are several dimensions to this trust that we wanted to unpack and explore a little bit further. And it's worth noting that there is a 16 percentage point trust gap between our white respondents and our respondents of color. So anytime you see BIPOC on the screen or BIPOC, we're referring to Black, Indigenous people of color. That's just a quick shorthand for us. I'll make my best effort to explicitly enunciate those things and not use too much jargon or acronyms as we're moving through the data. But that's what that indicates on the screen, is just our racially and ethnically diverse communities that we've collapsed into one category for convenience here. And then the last thing I'll note before we move on to a little bit more depth, although people generally associate positive characteristics and descriptions with police, and they receive positive ratings for a majority of the attributes of their service, white respondents do so consistently at higher rates than people of color throughout the state of Utah. So there's a consistent 6 to 8 percentage point difference across various measures. But when it comes to looking at perceived fairness or unfairness, the difference between white respondents and respondents of color in Utah reaches double digits. And that combined with this perceived trust gap, or this gap in reported trust between our white respondents and our respondents of color, is a significant thing to note and something that I think we should be striving to address. So we'll go through some of the dynamics around that trust. So I alluded to this already, but in total, 93% of Utah respondents say that they feel safe in their communities. That's more than half of white respondents and just a little under half of respondents of color. So 47% total say that they feel very safe where they live. Respondents living in rural and transitional areas are more likely to report feeling safe in their communities than are respondents who live in urban counties. But again, majority safe ratings across the board here, and not just safe, but very safe. And there are some generational disparities as well. So millennials and younger generations are likely to report feeling less safe, or are less likely to report feeling very safe than our older cohort Utahns. This chart looks remarkably similar. So I think it's worth noting that trust in law enforcement and perceived safety in your community, or how safe you feel in your community, are highly correlated. So Utahns overall feel very safe in their communities, and 53% of Utahns say that they have a great deal of trust in their local law enforcement officers. 35% say they have a moderate amount of trust, only 3% saying that they don't trust their local law enforcement at all. But I, again, want to point to the subgroup differences here. So we see that 56% of white Utahns say that they trust their local law enforcement officers a great deal, compared to just 38% of Utahns of color who have responded to our survey here. So again, that 16 percentage point trust gap is something that really stands out. Even more notably, there is a significant trust gap between our millennial and Gen Z respondents and our boomers and elder respondents in the survey. So 35% of millennial and younger respondents say that they have a great deal of trust in law enforcement, and 68% of those who are in our baby boomer and older cohorts say that they have a great deal of trust. So increasing skepticism and certainly some tensions along racial and ethnic lines worth noting. I'm looking a little bit more closely at perceptions of local law enforcement and evaluations of general police practices in our local communities. And we've broken this out among white respondents and respondents of color throughout the state, just for for ease of quick digestion more than anything. So this is the percentage of respondents in each subgroup who agree with each of the following statements. So 77% of white respondents and 69% of respondents of color say that the police in their area are usually reasonable and fair. Again, that 8 percentage point discrepancy or disparity is pretty pervasive here. Same can be said for whether the police in your area usually do the right thing in difficult situations. There's a 12 percentage point gap here between white respondents and respondents of color in the state of Utah. These are statistically significant differences, and that gap in perceptions and disparity is highly correlated with that trust that underlies all of our survey research here. Additionally, there's a 12 percentage point gap between perceptions of whether local law enforcement usually responds to a situation with too much force. So respondents of color are 12 percentage points more likely to agree or to indicate that police in their area respond with excessive force. And more than twice as many respondents, or more than twice the proportion of respondents in our communities of color responses say that the police treat them differently than they treat others when compared to our white cohort here. And then there is a perception that is held by a minority of respondents, but certainly still a significant gap between respondents of color and white respondents that police violate the law. So certainly, again, some dimensions of trust where we can identify areas where we can make improvements. We asked respondents to choose between a pair of words that they felt best described law enforcement officers or the police in their area. And overwhelmingly, we find that respondents select the positive attributes in those word pairings to describe police officers. So respectful over disrespectful, helpful over unhelpful. Going along down the line here, we've broken this up again among communities of color and white respondents, and we have pretty similar attribution or outcomes here. There are a few things that I will note. White respondents are consistently more likely to associate police officers with those positive attributes. And there are a couple areas where there's especially significant differences. The most significant difference comes when we look at this unfair to some groups versus fair to all dichotomy. Respondents of color throughout the state of Utah are nearly split 50-50 and significantly more likely to indicate that police officers in their area are unfair to some groups than are white respondents. The other thing that I think is worth noting, because it underpins so many of the potential avenues for progress as we continue to examine public opinion, is that respondents of color are more likely by about 9 percentage points to say that police officers in their area are disengaged from the community. This is something that really resonates from the focus groups that we conducted, as well as throughout this survey research. In our focus groups, we found that our communities of color participants really expressed that they didn't feel like the law enforcement officers in their communities were engaged with them, and they didn't feel a personal relationship with law enforcement. In fact, they tended to avoid interacting with law enforcement officers. And when we conducted our focus group with law enforcement officers in the state of Utah, we found that they felt like they were very integrated and supported by their communities. So there's a disconnect here. Our law enforcement officers generally feel supported, and our communities of color generally feel that when it comes to their communities specifically, they are not connected and are disengaged from law enforcement.
Okay, I'm good.
I'm continuing to examine some of these perceptions and looking specifically at community involvement. We asked respondents to what extent they agreed or disagreed with each of these statements, and we found that most respondents agreed with the majority of these statements. So the police department is accountable to community members, works together with community members to solve local problems. All of these measures are focused on how law enforcement officers interact with their communities. And there, once again, we find a consistent, but sort of shrinking in several places, gap between perceptions among white respondents and perceptions among respondents of color. So the areas where we see statistical parity, if not precise parity in these numbers. So accountability, that's something where a majority of respondents in both subgroups here believe that the police departments in their area are performing quite well. So 59% of respondents of color and 57% of white respondents feel that the police departments in their areas are accountable to the communities. When it comes to working together with community members to solve local problems, white respondents are significantly more likely to feel that the police department is working with the community to solve those problems. Communities of color, again, reporting less likelihood to agree with that statement, as about a 7 percentage point gap there. I'm going to just highlight the other gaps here because I think these are the most interesting areas where we find tension. When it comes to trying to increase trust and understanding with community members, there's a 7 percentage point gap here as well. White respondents are significantly more likely to report that their police officers are trying to increase that trust and understanding, and our communities of color are less likely to report that. These measures are significantly correlated with trust in general. So if we're thinking about accountability and transparency and efforts to increase trust and being seen as active in that vein, wanting to build those relationships with the community, those are things that have positive impacts on trust. And we see that gap between the perceptions of white respondents and respondents of color throughout the state of Utah. The other one that I'll highlight here that is less highly correlated, but still I think an important thing to note is that there's a 9 percentage point gap between white respondents and respondents of color when it comes to perceiving regular communication between the community and the police officers. So if we're trying to build relationships and foster trust and break down some of these barriers that are maybe more pervasive or more perceived, at least for communities of color in Utah, one of the keys here is going to be to communicate. And that's an area where we have a pretty significant disparity in perceptions. And I will just note that when speaking to our law enforcement officers in our focus groups, they were effusive about the opportunity to get more involved with their communities and be able to sort of take control of the narrative and interact more and start that dialogue. So again, I think lots of areas where we can find common ground. Looking at sort of general expectations and a willingness to interact with one another, continuing to build on that relationship concept, we find that white respondents are significantly more likely to report that they expect to be treated fairly by law enforcement officers in their community than are communities of color. We also see that communities of color are significantly less likely to feel comfortable reporting a crime or suspicious activity in their neighborhood to their local police department. And these differences, while again, a majority of Utahns agree with these sentiments, I think these differences are really where we should focus our attention and be focusing our future efforts as well. So that feeling of discomfort, or a little bit further down here, I generally try to keep my distance from law enforcement officers. Communities of color are 17 percentage points more likely to agree with that statement than are white respondents. These are areas where I think we need to be increasing opportunities for interaction and facilitating that trust building. The other thing that I want to highlight here that I think is a silver lining in what can sometimes be some pretty heavy data, when it comes to interest in communicating and connecting with local police departments, communities of color are 7 percentage points more likely to report that interest or to agree with that sentiment than are white respondents. So there's a desire to facilitate those relationships on both sides here, both in our communities and among our law enforcement officials. So looking a little bit more at the emotional context of the research we've done here, we ask respondents in this next section to express the extent to which they agree or disagree with a variety of sentiments. And there are several avenues here that are really community and relationship focused that I think identify some areas where we can build upon and improve the existing trust between law enforcement officers and Utah residents that aren't necessarily policy focused. So a lot of the levers that we have to pull are what we would call in the political science world soft power. So this doesn't necessarily mean that we have to make policy changes to facilitate trust. There are some things that maybe policy changes would help to facilitate that trust, but there are a lot of things that we've explored here and sentiments with which a majority of Utahns agree across the board. that don't require a policy change. So I think it's important to explore a variety of avenues that we have in front of us. And some of these emotional context statements will help to reiterate that, hopefully. And we do find some common ground in some of these sentiments. So I want to get into some of these. First, we asked respondents to agree or disagree with this statement. Law enforcement agencies should build relationships with the community to develop strategies that reduce crime and disorder. Given the level of disparity between perceptions of trust in the community and perceptions of safety in the community across some of our different county types, our generational cohorts, and our ethnic and racial groups here, the statistical similarities between these groups really stand out to me. So overall, 90% of respondents agree with this statement, and 90 to 94% of respondents in various county types, and 89% of millennials and younger respondents, 89% of Gen X respondents, and 94% of respondents who are sort of our boomers and older all agree with this sentiment. That 5 percentage point gap between millennials and our millennials and younger and our boomers and older cohorts is remarkably small, given some of the more intense policy and perception differences that we've seen between these groups. And the same can be said for our white respondents and our respondents from communities of color. A majority and statistically the same proportion agreeing with this sentiment. So that desire to develop strategies and work together and build relationships to promote public safety and the best interests of our communities is pervasive and something around which we can really unify. The same can be said here for this sentiment. It would be valuable for the community if local officers interacted with the public outside of enforcing the law. One thing that we heard in all of our focus groups was that the more involved police officers are with their local communities and the more the officers are interacting in a way that isn't necessarily punitive, the more likely it is that residents in communities of color will feel comfortable around those officers, will see them as a community resource and a part of that community rather than just law enforcement officers. And again, the similarities across different types of counties and generational cohorts and our racial and ethnic diversity subgroups here are astounding. So again, a unifying point, really focusing on that increased community building. Along the same vein here, local law enforcement officers should attend community events, give public presentations, and participate in community service projects. 3/4 of residents on the whole agree with that sentiment. That's a particularly popular one for our residents from rural counties, but otherwise, statistical parity across all of our subgroups here as well. And then with a slight shift here, local law enforcement officers need to do a better job of working with community members to identify problems and solutions. This one we had slightly less agreement on, and we start to see that gap between our generational cohorts emerge again. So 69% of millennials or younger agreed with that sentiment compared to just 60% of Gen X and 62% of our boomers or older. And then here again, we see some emergence of differences between our communities of color and our white respondents, where our communities of color are significantly more likely to agree that there's room to improve when it comes to working with community members to identify those problems and solutions. Some additional areas where I think it's interesting to examine the potential for progress and maybe the lack of inclination as well. So one of the measures that we didn't explicitly test, because I don't think the branding is right for most Utah audiences, is the defund the police movement. But we did want to test reactions around some of the talking points there without expressly diving into something so politicized on the national stage. So instead of asking whether respondents supported or opposed the defund the police movement, we went about this a few different ways. One of which was gauging reactions to this statement. Decreasing the law enforcement budget will make my community less safe. And on average, 2/3 of Utahns agreed with this statement. That's true across different types of counties, though again, rural respondents agreed with this most often. And there's a significant generational gap. So just half of millennials or younger agreed with this statement, but at least 2/3 and 3/4 of our boomer and older category say that they agree with that statement, that law enforcement budgets going down would lead to less safety and less desirable outcomes for their communities. The same can be said for a majority of respondents of color and for 2/3 of white respondents, though again, there is a perception gap here. On the flip side, we asked respondents whether they agreed or disagreed with this statement: providing more funding for police training and compensation will improve law enforcement in my community. And 2/3 of respondents agreed with that overall. And again, we have pretty significant parity across county types here, though again, rural respondents agree more enthusiastically. We definitely see that consistent generational gap between our youngest cohort and our older generations. But I think the most fascinating thing about this is we have precise proportional parity between our respondents of color and our white respondents in agreement to this sentiment. So the idea that what we actually need is more funding for police training and compensation to produce more desirable outcomes is something that's strongly held across many different cohorts here, and certainly among both communities of color and our white population in Utah. We also asked respondents whether they agreed or disagreed with this statement: racial profiling is prevalent within law enforcement in my community. Just over 1/3 of respondents in total agreed with that sentiment, but more than half of millennials and more than half of communities of color indicated that they agreed that racial profiling was prevalent. So while I think it's important to note that this is something that's perceived as a prevalent issue by a minority of Utah residents, it isn't universally seen as an outsider or an other issue. This is something that young residents and residents of Utah who are representing racially and ethnically diverse backgrounds see as a prevalent problem, and a majority of them identify this as a prevalent problem. And then just the last sentiment here, we asked respondents whether they agreed or disagreed with this one: public or police officers in my community should primarily focus on enforcement and keeping things under control. Just over 2/3 of respondents agreed with this one. And the most interesting thing here to me is that this is one area where millennials and our older generation cohort agree, and Gen X is sort of the outside group here. So I can think of, I was postulating with Cam earlier when we previewed a little bit of this data to him about some of the reasons why millennials and boomers might gang up against Gen X. I'm happy to talk through theories later, but I think worth noting that this is another sentiment where communities of color agree a little bit more strongly than white communities, but overall about 2/3 at least of respondents see that or would agree that focusing on enforcement and keeping things under control is an important value for police officers in Utah. Looking now at some of the policy options that have been in discussions to date and sort of part of the ongoing dialogue here, we are looking at both the perceived prevalence of police misconduct, and we asked respondents to indicate how closely they've been following these things and at what levels, if any, they think that's a prevalent issue. And then we asked them to indicate whether they would support or oppose a variety of potential reforms or talking points and broad concepts. I won't say policies specifically because there's a lot of room for nuance and specific development when we're talking about making policy decisions. And we are asking respondents to just evaluate high-level support or opposition for general concepts or ideas of where they would like to see potential improvements made. We also didn't ask respondents to make trade-offs. So we didn't say, between all of these different ideas, what would you like to see decision makers pursue? What do you think the legislature should do if you have to pick one of these 5 options? We didn't ask respondents to do that because most of the time, respondents, generally speaking, are not well equipped to make those decisions. What we did do was ask them to evaluate whether they would support or oppose high-level concepts as ideas to improve accountability and to facilitate equitable treatment of all Utahns. So keeping that framework in mind as we go through the proposals that we tested here, I think is important. But first, looking at the perceptions of prevalence of misconduct, it's worth noting that misconduct is perceived to be significantly more prevalent at higher levels of government or outside of local municipalities. So 28% of Utahns say that police misconduct is very prevalent throughout the United States, and 38% of those who say that they've been following the news about police issues and misconduct very closely believe that that's very prevalent in the US. So that's a 10 percentage point gap among those who say they're following this the most closely and the perceived prevalence here. So if you're really in tune and really following along and looking for these types of stories and information, you believe that it is more prevalent in the United States by a factor of 10 percentage points. That gap or that disparity shrinks as we get closer to local government. So throughout the state of Utah, 12% of Utahns believe that police misconduct is very prevalent, and 16% of those who are following very closely believe that it's very prevalent. So again, that gap is shrinking a little bit here. And then 9% of Utahns on average believe that police misconduct is very prevalent in their local area or town, compared to 13% of those who are following along closely. So again, that gap really shrinks compared to the national stage when we're looking at perceptions of local government and local law enforcement officials. Just 1 in 4 Utahns believes that police misconduct is moderately or very prevalent in their local communities. We did ask respondents to tell us a little bit about the types of misconduct that they believed were prevalent in their local communities. Our sample size here got pretty small, but I did want to pull out just some of the themes that stood out here. So the larger the word is in this cloud, the more frequently it was mentioned. Excessive force, racial profiling, mental health, I think are the largest themes that jump out here. And then there are many tangentially or otherwise related issues in this word cloud. We also pulled out some verbatim comments just to help express the themes that we were seeing in these open-ended responses. And we tried to pull out some comments from people from a variety of backgrounds and locations throughout the state. So you can see here we have a resident in Weber County, a resident in Iron County, a resident in Utah County, and a resident in Salt Lake County, all expressing similar themes and sort of different words around the types of misconduct that they believe are prevalent issues in Utah communities. We also asked respondents whether they agreed or disagreed with this statement, which is taken almost verbatim from the Utah State Code regarding the use of deadly force. So police officers only use deadly force when they reasonably believe that it is necessary to protect themselves or members of the public from death or serious injury. 71% of our respondents agreed with that statement, and 20% in total disagreed. I think that 71% majority is reassuring. That 20% who disagree is still identifying some room for improvement here. And among our respondents of color, those who indicate that they disagree with that statement and strongly disagree with that statement are twice the proportion. So again, certainly some signal of room for improvement here, and that maybe that's an area where we can begin to improve trust in our communities. This is also another area where there's a large discrepancy between our youngest generational cohort and our oldest generational cohort in our respondents. So now getting into some of the policy change concepts. The most popular one we tested here in terms of promoting accountability as that relates to trust in law enforcement officers. So in the interest of promoting transparency and accountability, Utahns are interested in seeing officers report peer misconduct and requiring comprehensive de-escalation training for police officers in our communities. They're also interested and would strongly support requiring the use of body cameras on officers regardless of cost. You can see that we've really pared all of these concepts down to something that's easy for the average Utahn to digest and express an opinion about. And that means that there's a lot of room for nuance and interpretation and a lot of room to where we need to shape and contour policy around these things. But in terms of the concepts that would be palatable for Utah residents, we have majority strong support for most of these ideas. The things that fall below majority strong support that I want to highlight here: instituting civilian review boards to examine complaints against officers in their communities. Less than half of respondents say they would strongly support that proposal. And then establishing stricter standards for the use of force. Less than half of respondents would strongly support that proposal as well. We also looked at total support for these policy proposals among our subgroups here. And again, there are some persistent differences where we have significantly more support in some areas and significantly less support in a few areas that are notable as well. So the interesting one for me, disciplining or prosecuting officers who use excessive force was actually slightly less popular among communities of color than other proposals. But when it comes to requiring the use of body cameras at all times, or instituting civilian review boards, which was one of the less popular proposals that was examined in this section, those ideas and concepts are more supported among our communities of color. But significant parity across some of these as well. So 85 and 83% would be statistical tie here in terms of establishing an independent record of police officers who have been flagged for misconduct, or looking at this 88 and 99%, again, requiring officers just to report peer misconduct or requiring the use of body cameras. Pretty close here in terms of support for general proposal ideas. We definitely see lower support across the board in rural counties, except for body cameras. That was one that stood out. Rural counties are more supportive of the use of body cameras than are their transitional cohorts, and are statistically tied with their urban counterparts. And then they are statistically significantly less supportive overall of instituting civilian review boards. So again, certainly there are different approaches that make sense for different parts of the state, and there are cohorts and coalitions of support and opposition here. But we find that when it comes to just thinking about these proposals at a high level, we have a majority support for most of the proposals in many of these subgroups. And then similarly, we asked respondents to indicate whether they would support or oppose these policies intended to promote equitable treatment of all community members. So that first set was focused on transparency and accountability, and this set is focused explicitly on equitable treatment. And the one that stands out leaps and bounds ahead of the rest is truly the one that's the least policy oriented. So encouraging officers to build relationships with people in the community. Again, that soft power, that idea that we're fostering these relationships and outside of additional legislative changes or impositions. 75% of Utahns strongly support that approach. But additionally, more than half of respondents supported all of these additional ideas. So providing dispatchers with additional resources other than police officers to respond to unique and specific incidents, providing officers with language assistance programs to facilitate communication with non-English speaking residents, staffing police departments with social workers to assist in cases involving mental health, penalizing officers for racially biased policing, and requiring implicit bias training or cultural sensitivity training for all police departments. These are all statistically tied at 56-ish% strongly support on average. And I will note that the total opposition to each of these is statistically tied as well, but there is a little bit of a hierarchy here, where once we get to requiring implicit bias training, we start to see opposition tick up just slightly. But again, statistically, we have equivalence, basically a tie for the second most popular policy concept here. And then as we go down the line here, just slightly less popular ideas, but half of respondents say that they would support increasing diversity of officers and employees within police departments. And then less than half of respondents say that they would support collecting data about impacts of policing on people of color and making the results public. The most divisive policy option that we tested here, or that we gauged support for, was again, sort of that defund the police sentiment without using the politicized framework. But the idea of redistributing current funding for law enforcement to support other community programs was, again, very divisive among Utah residents. So 21% strongly support that one, and a comparable 28% strongly oppose that idea. And I have subgroup breakouts for this slide as well. It did not make it into this iteration, so I apologize in advance. I will make sure that is in the PDF that's sent around after this presentation. And then just a quick methodological conclusion here. I just wanted to tell everyone a little bit about our survey composition if I had a bit of time. So just so you all know what we were looking at in terms of methodology, we had 1,678 respondents in total, just over 1,500 of which were online and 133 were conducted via live telephone interviews. We oversampled among communities of color so that we would have a sufficient sample to do some of this subgroup analysis. And we also oversampled, as Cam mentioned before, in Salt Lake City and Ogden, so that we'll be able to do some additional analysis there as well. The survey was available in 12 different languages, including English, Spanish, Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, French, Cambodian, Nepali, Farsi, Bosnian, Arabic, and Somali. And 139 respondents took their survey in a language other than English. So with that, that was a lot of me talking through a lot of data, but I am happy to address any questions that may have come up in the course of my presentation.
Kyrene, there are a couple of questions that have come into the chat box, and Mayor Caldwell, we've got a few minutes to take questions if people want to put additional questions in the chat box. So Kyrene, we have the question here from Chief Carr of South Jordan about the social media influence, and if you have any thoughts there.
I think that is highly likely. We don't have a way to explicitly disentangle what is shaping our respondents' policy preferences or attitudes. But I think as we're looking at sort of the generational ideological balance of Utahns, we do find that those who are the most plugged in on social media, the most, they tend to have more progressive policy ideals and a little bit of a counterculture swing, I think, against some of the more conservative values of older generational cohorts. So certainly news sources have a part to play in that.
Kyrene, I tried to address Mayor Mendenhall's question around the nuance of the different policy concepts that we surveyed. Can you provide just a little more context there of the thought process behind the framing?
Yeah, I'm trying to catch up on what you already said here. But in regards to whether respondents explicitly understood what a civilian review board was or what they would do, again, we didn't get into a lot of detail there because we don't want this data to leave anyone feeling like their hands are tied. We instead tried to explain it in as close to layman's terms as we can when we're talking about what that board would do and sort of examining different behaviors and cases that are brought before the board for review, but without going into additional, I guess, jurisdiction. So it was kept pretty vague for the intent of leaving that to decision makers.
I appreciate that. And I would chime in that with only 2 cities having any history of a civilian review board ever, it's not surprising that most respondents who would say, you know, I don't really know what that is, so I can't say I would support changes. So I guess I want to be encouraging of the incorporation or consideration of other cities of how to permanently bring in community voices into some of those considerations that we make, not necessarily an expansion of their powers, but it's not well known to most residents in the state.
I would agree. I'll just add that we've seen different models from all over the United States. You say it's Citizens Review Board, but they all have different responsibilities and experience and everything else. So it can be really confusing.
Yeah, I think.
And oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say another comment there. I think in terms of a citizen review board versus like in Harriman, we have a citizens advisory board, probably a little bit different a scope of practice of that board, what they do. But again, terminology and their function does make a big difference. But the advisory board is something that we've had in place out here since the inception of our police department just a little over 2 years ago. And it definitely is something that is not as well known, but it's still known in our community. And I think lends itself to have a lot more trust in our police department because that aspect was incorporated right from their inception.
Thank you. To address this next question here, so our mayor in North Salt Lake asked how much of the percentage of difference between white and respondents of color can be explained by income and age. We explicitly left income breakdowns out of our subgroup analysis in this presentation because that is highly correlated with some of the other factors that we're examining. But there are statistically significant differences across age cohorts within racial and ethnic identity groups. So if we're looking at white respondents exclusively, we still see a significant gap between our millennial and younger respondents and our boomer and older respondents. So I don't have an explicit percentage for you, but I can say that those differences across generations are pervasive within racial and ethnic groups. Any additional questions? I want to make sure I'm not overlooking anything that happened in the chat box while I was presenting.
Kyrene, let me add one thing while people are stewing on a potential additional question, and that is, where do we go from here? The Loveless and Lead Task Force that Councilmember Mendenhall referenced will meet this Thursday. We'll be looking at a couple of bills that the legislature is considering during interim meetings this week. I mentioned that the task force has not made any recommendations yet, but I expect that'll happen soon, and then we'll be bringing those recommendations back to you as a board and to the LPC. We felt like it was important before we started down the road of policy recommendations to make sure we had a better understanding of where the community was at broadly around trust and what potential actions, be they policy or be they outreach by local police departments, could make a difference to improve trust. That's been the prism that we've tried to run all of the different policy ideas through, is will this improve trust? We've asked multiple community stakeholders, for example, over the course of the summer, when they bring up a proposal, we'll say, okay, explain to us why you think this proposal would result in improved trust between the community and law enforcement. So there's a lot of analysis that now we can do with Y2 and working with the steering committee and members of the task force to better understand the context behind the data sets that we're all seeing for the first time today. Oh, Mayor Bierman, when can you get a copy? I see several people on my screen nodding their heads and smiling. You can get a copy when we're ready to share it, which will be as soon as possible. So how's that for a non-answer?
And that's a lot of information. So we really appreciate the time, effort, and energy that went into this. Thank you very much for doing that. I think we all have some of the same desire to absorb and contemplate and think about what came out of this. We all, at the end of the day, have some of the same goals for our community. So thank you very, very much for that. It was long, and like I said, there's a lot to digest there. So thank you so much for your work and your effort and everything that went into this. Does anybody else have any other comments before we move on? Okay, hearing none. Again, thank you for that. That was a lot of information, and I think we'll all spend a lot of time thinking about that as we move forward and work with our community and our public safety groups. Up next, we have a transition team for Governor-elect Spencer Cox. And again, we go to you, Cameron.
Yeah, never a dull moment around here, it seems. So thank you, Mayor Caldwell. The last thing I'll just mention on the Y2 data is that from day one, we've been striving to find that space of supporting officers and identifying potential areas of improvement. So I want to thank the members of the task force and you as a board for your support. I think the survey will be helpful as we dig deeper to try to find that right balance. There are going to be there are going to be a lot of bills, and one of the allies that we will have going forward in preserving the autonomy and the authority of cities as you provide not just public safety, but planning and zoning in your communities is going to be the governor-elect, Spencer Cox. Mayor Ramsey, and then because we've got the honorary John Pike who joined us for the Y2 piece. Both of them serve on the transition team for the governor-elect. Mayor Ramsey, can you just take a quick moment to give an overview of the transition team's approach, and then I'll jump into the plan that we emailed out for people's consideration.
Sure. Myself and Mayor Pike and Mayor Reese, I think, are all serving on one committee or another, and there may be others of you on here. There may be others I just am not aware of from amongst our body. But what the new administration is looking at doing is, to the best of our knowledge, is they're doing just a comprehensive review of every different department in the state, just to help give Governor-elect Cox a clear understanding of where things are at, how things sit. And so he's brought together people from across the state, from both parties, and both from government and industry to just put together these boards to do an evaluation and to make clear that it's not a witch hunt. It's not looking for tell me everything that's wrong, or that's not what it is. He just wants a really comprehensive view and a thorough understanding of where each department is, with recommendations being made from the board should there be any. Not the board, from each committee. So I have the chance to work with Thomas Wright and Amanda Covington on a UDOT review committee. So we're doing a review of UDOT. And along with that, I'm putting together just a very simple questionnaire, because one of the things in the outline that we received that they'd like to know is what public perception is of UDOT. And so if any of you are interested in filling out just this little survey, it's not going to be anything like what Y2 does. It's a very homemade little survey that if you would like to just give your feedback on your thoughts on UDOT, I'd be happy to send it to you, and your responses will remain anonymous. They'll just help us get a collective understanding of how people feel about UDOT, because out of all the different departments in the state, most people, even if they don't know anything about any departments of the state, are aware that UDOT exists, because we all drive on the roads and we all see the orange cones. And so anyway, if anybody has any feedback they'd like to give, let me know in the chat or send me an email or a text, and I'll be happy to send this survey out to you. Mayor Pike is working on the Rural Matters Review Committee, and Mayor Reese is working, what is hers called? Oh, State Government Efficiency.
It's the uplift.
Right? Yep. Government Efficiency, which I believe she's working, that's the committee that Amy Winter Newton is on with her. And Amy called me a couple days ago, and I know that what they're taking a look at is just all the different departments that exist, and maybe the roles that exist, and determining efficiency. You know, is there redundancy? Is there somewhere where we have gaps? Is there somewhere where we have more people than we need doing the same kind of thing? So anyway, I believe the transition, that's really their goal, is to have a report from each committee that's doing a review by about December 7th to Governor-elect Cox, so that he can then go forward and make decisions about what the administration will look like, and try to help be as efficient and productive going forward, and I think inclusive as possible.
Terrific. Thank you, Mayor. Mayor Pike, can I put you on the spot? Mayor Caldwell, if that's all right with you, to give your quick overview of your participation within the transition team?
I always like putting Mayor Pike on the spot.
Yeah, boy. I must say you're running a very efficient meeting, President Caldwell. Anyway, and he does it standing up. The Rural Matters Committee is basically looking at a list of kind of maybe 5 aspirations that would be important to rural Utah, which, you know, by geography is most of Utah, you know, not necessarily by population, but by geography, that's a lot of Utah. And so we're working through those aspirations that were kind of really set with input by the campaign. And now they're kind of fleshing that out. They've asked us to flesh those out, add to, subtract from. We won't be subtracting from, we'll be adding to, and then to try to lay things out in a first 200 days, first 500 days, first 5,000 days of office, if you will. So it's a lot to kind of put forward, as Mayor Ramsey said, by December 7th, but we're talking about an executive summary kind of document that's more than one page, but far fewer than 50 pages. So that's what we've been asked to put together. Our committee, for example, has 5 members, 4 commissioners from around the state, and yours truly from down here. So it's a positive thing, and I think they've asked us to set the bar high and see what the new administration can put their minds to.
Terrific. Thank you, Mayor Pike, and thank you, Mayor Ramsey. One thing I should point out is that the governor-elect is not including any registered lobbyists within the transition team. So that excludes yours truly, as well as a bunch of people. And honestly, I think that's a good thing, because thus far they've done a really nice job of outreach to a variety of stakeholders. They're holding, for example, small group meetings with every legislator to understand the needs in their districts. I've chatted with the transition team leadership. Andrew Gruber from Wasatch Front Regional Council has met with them. So, they know, generally they know the needs of local government, because the governor-elect campaigned on his experience as a local government leader. And I did a little bit of research, and he is the first mayor turned governor since J. Bracken Lee back in 1948. And that's something that I think we should, as an organization, highlight in the year, the 500 days, and as Mayor Pike put it, the 5,000 days to come, which would be 13.7 years. So that would be the next 3.5 terms. So long story short, what we have put together for your consideration is a plan of engagement with the governor-elect and the new administration, and that's in your board packet. Nick, can you pull up the board packet to the proposed plan of engagement? As Nick pulls that up, after talking with Mayors Reese, Pike, and Ramsey, we focused, instead of right now delivering a bunch of policy papers and white papers to the transition team, that instead we would focus on formalizing the partnership between the governor-elect and local government. He will be a champion for local government. He has since the day he first took office as a mayor or as a council member in Fairview, but we want to formalize that partnership. You'll see in the mission statement how we would frame this to the governor-elect, and then Nick, you can scan down to section 2 here, which is formalize the partnership. Mayor Caldwell, we need guidance on either option 1 or option 2 or both, but the thought process here is to formalize regular communication and make this an official ask from the league between senior staff and league officers, with the senior staff of the administration, and as necessary, the governor and lieutenant governor. That's option 1. And then option 2 would broaden that, so you'd have a local government cabinet, which would also include AOG and MPO leaders, UAC leaders, and others for regular meetings. And again, we could do a combination of both. I've spoken with my counterparts in state leagues around the country about how they handle transitions and different things that they've requested. And this formalizing the partnership has been really successful for the state of Washington and their league and some other leagues. In the short term, we want to identify the primary liaison between local government and the governor. We all know and love Mike Maurer. And basically what we're saying is, who is the next Mike Maurer? And will that individual have the ear of the governor and be the primary liaison of local governments? In the long term, this is worthy of another 24-hour conversation. In the state of Colorado and a few other states, there's actually a state department that focuses on bringing together all of the state partnerships and collaborations with local governments. In Colorado, it's called the Department of Local Affairs. My counterpart in Colorado believes very strongly in it and thinks it's been a very valuable way to organize state government in the state of Colorado. If this is something that intrigues you as a board, we could look into it in the months to come. but we don't want to go down that rabbit hole if there's not interest from this group, and if the governor-elect's not interested. But in light of the fact that he's looking at all of the agencies and how to improve the overall efficiency of the agencies, we wanted to put this concept on your radar. The second piece of the plan, as you can see, is that the membership level. So it's getting past the staff and officer and leadership team level and continuing the town halls that we started with the lieutenant governor during the spring and early summer, and doing those regularly throughout the year. We also want to offer a standing invitation to a league event, and then potentially invite the Lieutenant Governor-elect Deidre Henderson to do a town hall for the youth in lieu of Local Officials Day at some point in early January. Then the third piece is to partner with the league to publicly praise cities for what you're doing. When Mayor Fulmer referenced some of the challenges that she's facing as a fast-growing community, we thought it would be great if the governor could use his communication platforms to positively praise the good things we're doing to plan for population growth, to positively praise the peace officers who are making a difference in their communities and their potential partners that we could utilize for that type of recognition. So that's the engagement side. I'm going to stop there, Mayor Caldwell, before I get into the policy side to see if there's any feedback, and then at some point we'll welcome a motion to approve this as the engagement plan.
Cam, one question I have with the engagement plan: what do you as a staff recommend, and what bandwidth do you think you all have to do some of those recommendations?
Thank you, Mayor. That should be the number one question we ask of anything, right? But so I appreciate you bringing that up. I think what we've put forward is doable within our bandwidth. Nick, can you scan back up to section 2? I think it's eminently doable to do regular town halls and to build this type of regular communication and correspondence into our annual calendar. The biggest ask would be the restructuring of state government to have a local affairs department. That's why I put it out there that if it's something that interests you as a board, then we could look into it further and get a better understanding of the pros and cons in Colorado and other states, and then eventually take that up the chain of command. So that would be by far the biggest lift. I think everything outside of that is doable. It fits within our advocacy efforts anyway. It's just trying to formalize it a little bit more.
Cameron, this is Carrie Malkovich, Woodland Hills. I have a question about that Department of Local Affairs. So just give us a brief overview. I know you say you want to go into a deep dive, but does this doesn't replace the league? The league would just be a stakeholder in this department, or how is it organized that it's helpful to us? Because we rely a lot on the league at this point. So what would be the role of the league compared to how it would help us as municipalities?
Perfect. Yeah, thank you for asking that clarifying question. So think about all the ways that your city interacts with state government. This would not be a replacement for the league as a trainer or as an advocate for you. Instead, it would be a way to structure state government to be more efficient in how they interact with local government. So right now, your city will engage with the Department of Environmental Quality. You'll engage with the Tax Commission. You'll engage with the Department of Transportation. There are all these different points of contact with the state that are not even at the elected official level, they're at the staff level. And so what they've tried to do in Colorado is to try to consolidate some of those things under one roof. Again, I know enough about it that it intrigues me. I don't know enough about it to be able to give you an adequate review of the pros and cons, but it fits into the questions that we've been asked by the governor-elect. So if it's something that you would like us to look into further, we could do that. Bandwidth-wise, we won't really be able to do that sort of deep dive until after the legislative session. But that's something we could just put a marker down and say, Governor-elect, over the next 4 years, as you talk about overall efficiency and the interaction between state government and local government, there are some ways that you could potentially restructure state government to accomplish that. It may not be worthwhile. That's why we think in the short term, the top priorities ought to be formalizing the partnership with this regular communication between league leaders and the governor-elect, as well as identifying that liaison and offering the invitation for him to present to our members.
I think the reality of what we're going to see in the next little bit, a brand new governor, really unique and potentially awkward legislative session, and all the jockeying, the heavy lift, that might be a year or two out. So I think option 1 or 2 are really good opportunities, and it can be a combination of both of those. What are you looking for from us, Cam, in terms of guidance to you and the staff?
Well, what I'll do, Mayor, is I'll quickly review the last piece of this plan, and then if people have feedback, something that they want to add or change, then let us know, and then a motion of general support for this plan so we can put the finishing touches on it and make sure it makes it to the governor-elect during his time frame this fall.
Great, thanks. Go ahead.
Okay, Nick, can you scan down then to section 3? Okay, on the policy priorities, in lieu of doing big white papers at this point, in light of everything we know that's being funneled to the transition team, we thought we would identify it this way. First, we sent out a survey with the board packet. A third of you have filled out that survey, so thank you. And when we send our follow-up email today or tomorrow morning, we'll provide this link again to you to give us your thoughts about potential budget priorities for this upcoming fiscal year. You can see that traditionally we don't get involved in the appropriations process for specific dollar amounts or specific appropriations to specific cities, but instead the general concept around certain appropriations, such as on the housing bill the last couple of years, we have supported state dollars to help offset the cost of affordable housing, even though it wasn't funded 2 years ago and was partially funded this past year. So that's one where we would proactively speak out. So we will send that link. It was in the email that we sent to you last Thursday, and request that you fill that out by the end of this week so that we can assemble all of the feedback from you about this upcoming budget year. We know that the governor-elect is using the current staff of GOMB to prepare his first budget. So that's why we think this checks that box on policy. We also asked in the survey for your top policy priorities, because what we want to do is present to the governor-elect that here are the big picture topics that city leaders want to partner with him on to make significant progress in the year and 4 years to come. Nick, you can scan down. So again, filling out that survey for us will be very helpful. And then the last piece is this executive summary of the policy resolutions and principles that our membership has already adopted. You can see we've listed a few of them down there in little d, ranging from tax policy to land use authority, population growth, to public safety. And so rather than rewriting briefing papers, we thought we would just deliver the resolutions that you have endorsed in recent years and say, this is the foundation of what we do as cities, and we'll provide you with white papers as necessary as different issues come up, but that would give him the foundation of how to interact with us formally going forward. The last thing I'll point out is that the survey that we sent out last Thursday, and we'll resend either tonight or tomorrow to you, is about the budget and the top public policy priorities. We will send a survey to you later this month in anticipation of the December meeting about the legislative tiers. We also, in the email, will send you Mayor Reese's specific question about efficiency of state government. We did not ask that of you last week because I felt like that question is less for elected officials and more for staff. And so, Gary, my thought there was that we would send that question to you as a board, and I'll send it to you, Gary, so you can share with your fellow city administrators so we can get some specific feedback to that work group about potential areas of improvement for efficiency of state government and how they interact with cities. Again, the clock is ticking because all of these reports are due to the transition team by December 7th. So, Mayor Caldwell, I'll stop there to see if there are any additional questions, and then wait for your guidance about the kitchen cabinet versus a league-only group that would meet with the governor's team, and then a motion to approve the general direction of the plan.
Thanks, Cam. Any additional thoughts or comments?
this is Dawn. Do you mind if I weigh in just a thought?
Please do.
I like the idea of proposing a kitchen cabinet between us and some of our partners, because we do work closely together with, you know, other MPOs, Wasatch Front Regional Council, for example. I mean, there are a few other organizations, and I think I like the idea of being able to propose that we get together with those groups, with the governor's office quarterly to, or as often as, you know, as they are okay with, to really discuss the things that we're working on together, because we can help each other get things done. And honestly, I think some of those other organizations are very helpful to us. And if they're there with us, helping advocate for us, then it's not just the cities asking for certain things. If we've got the county there and some of the MPOs there, it gives strength to whatever it is that I think we're focused on and working on. That's just my 2 cents worth. And I don't know if that's something they're interested in or not. And if not, then I like, you know, the other option as well. But I like the idea of at least proposing this. It's different. It's not been done. It's not what we've done in Utah, but I'm a big fan of the idea, and it's something I would love to explore, because I think it has potential to help us get a lot done.
Mr. Chair, I second that, because I think, you know, if we can engage in policy discussions before policy gets formulated, we can have a lot better input and not just be reactive to stuff. And I think we can be more effective that way.
I don't think that was intended as a first and a second, but we did have a first and a second. Are there any other comments about what Cameron just presented?
I'm happy to make my comments an official motion.
Okay.
Likewise.
All right, we have a first and a second for the kitchen cabinet approach, and I would tend to agree with that. I think that's a comprehensive strategy. Always helps to have more voices at the table and on the same sheet of music. So with that, we'll accept a motion to approve the kitchen cabinet approach. Is all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed to that approach? Hearing none. Cameron, I think you have some direction. Do you need anything else from us?
Yep, just a general motion then for the overall plan of engagement.
Accept a general motion for the overall plan of engagement.
Moved.
Second.
Do we have those on? Who made the motions?
This is Mayor Ramsey.
And Carrie Malkovich.
Thank you. First and the second, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, that passes as well. Thank you very much for that. Cam, anything you need to add?
The one last bit, thank you for the motions of support. We'll put meat on the bones here and have something ready to go. The one, we'll work through the kitchen cabinet concept. I do think it's important to make sure that the league officers maintain their independent voice too, as we meet with the governor. And if I heard the motions correctly, it was not an either, it was both, right? Have the kitchen cabinet option and build that coalition, but then still have the league officers have the ability to speak independently of the kitchen cabinet, correct?
Yes. Yeah, that's my intention. It's not at all to try to dilute our voice as a league. It's to empower us by combining our strength and having that collective efficacy as a whole bunch of organizations, but not at all to take away from our ability to advocate for the league specifically and independently when needed.
Perfect. Great. Well, thank you, everybody. We'll put this together. I know it's 1:50, but I'm confident we can get through the remaining 3 items in the next 10 minutes. So I'll turn it to Mayor Caldwell. Before you turn it to Nick and Brooke, I just personally want to thank Brooke for her work on top of her day job, on top of her school studies. She has partnered with us as a consultant as part of an academic project and has been a tremendous asset for us. So Brooke, thank you very much for your work with us over the last few months. Nick?
Thank you, Cam. And I would just like to echo that as well. Brooke has been tremendous in helping us with the purchasing policy update that you'll see in your packet. And I will just real quickly go through The three updates that we have, I will share my screen here. We focused a lot in our meetings on what we do as a league externally, and now it's time for just a little bit of introspection. These policy changes are really things that will help me accomplish my job for you here at the league. So I'll go through these very briefly. I'll let Brooke talk about the purchasing policy a little more. We've updated that. And the thing that I think is the coolest that she's added is this matrix that actually gets through the procurement Ds, as I've called it, and really shows you how you have to go about it. So I'll let her elaborate on that in just a moment. If you remember from our last meeting, we established a finance and audit committee, and Mayor Arvey as the treasurer and Councilmember Smith also joined that committee. We are happy to have any other volunteers join, but in our policies, accounting policies and procedures, we have included this finance and audit committee within the roles that everyone plays within our finance team. So you will find that there as well. One thing I do want to note, actually, as I go back to the purchasing policy, there were a couple of typos that we've corrected that change from what you have received in your packet to what is actually presented here. One of them was just a change from 5 to 7 days to be consistent throughout the policy. And the couple others were just capitalizing letters in the matrix. And then on to our records and management access resolution and fee schedule. We didn't get to it in, I believe it was a couple meetings ago, but it was in your packet that we had our first appeal at the State Records Committee. So we just wanted to tighten up and formalize some of the policies that we've had in practice. That will allow us to charge fees and also just have kind of things more set when we run into some of these vexatious requests that we've been dealing with. There is one change in that section as well versus what you have in your packet in the fee schedule. The original did not have the last item, which I will get to right here, which is just, I'll actually get to it first. We have also added third-party services actual cost there. Sometimes when we have to dig through archived emails, we have to go with our IT company. And they charge additional fees for that. Also, when we have to get archived materials from where we store them, we do have a fee to bring those boxes into the office to go through them. So I've based this resolution on other resolutions I found registered with the Department of Archives and Record Services. And if you have any questions surrounding that resolution, I'm happy to answer those. Any questions around the Finance and Audit Committee as well, or if anyone would like to additionally volunteer. And then if there are no questions there, I'll turn the rest of the time in this section over to Brooke to kind of walk through what we're doing with our purchasing policy.
Absolutely. Thanks, Nick. And thanks for the shout out, Cam and Nick. I appreciate it. Like Nick said, I have updated the purchasing policy, and the goals for the policy was to make it more clean and transparent, and then also streamline it to make it more efficient and effective for the league. And with that, I did that by adding levels of detail, defining best practices, and adding exemptions. So we created this robust purchasing policy, but no one likes to read purchasing policy. So to help with that, I created this procurement matrix that really narrows down what it is that people need to do when buying with government's funds. Because a lot of times employees will know what they need to buy and how much it costs, but they don't know what to do with it. So this purchasing matrix is broken up into 3 or 4 levels. And with each level, there's added levels of transparency and directions and oversight that the league can follow. For example, if you follow the first and second columns of supplies, you can see if you're buying something that's under $1,000 and the total bill is under $5,000, then there's no minimal purchase. This is different from what is in the code right now for the league. They are allowed $3,000. So we've lowered that cost down, but this also follows state law. So there's no confusion on what the procurement codes and levels of detail are. And then as you go down the level, each procurement, as you add more services or more costs, there's additional oversight, and you'll be notified, the board will be notified, the public will be notified in specific ways. And then if you scroll down, Nick, one more page, the final level is if it's over $50,000, then it's opened up in the public procurement with the UP3 portal that's provided by the state. And then we also added the levels of definition. There's 5 definitions that the league can follow. The previous matrix or the previous code had 2 levels of definition. So it really gives flexibility to the league, but also gives them better definition and clear instructions on how to move forward. And with that, I'll turn the time back over to Nick, unless there's any questions.
Do you have any questions?
Excellent. Yes, this has been great walking through with Brooke. She's an active member with the, I am drawing a blank on the official name, National Government Purchasers Institute.
It's NIGP, the national and local chapter of NIGP, which is a procurement agency.
Awesome. Yes, it's been great to have her expertise on this particular portion of our policy update. And as we've walked through it, I don't think this is the last thing as we talk about bandwidth is that we want to do is increase our administrative burden for no good reason. And I think we're going to be absolutely fine going through our normal purchases, and we'll just be a little more in line with best practices. Does anyone have any questions on either the purchasing policy, the finance and audit committee, or the grandma resolution and fee schedule? All right. If we do not, Mayor Caldwell, we would be happy to entertain a motion to accept all of these changes.
Okay, would be happy to entertain a motion to adopt the proposed grammar resolution and ULCT personnel and accounting policies. Is there somebody willing to make a motion?
I will. So moved.
Mayor Niehaus, I'll second.
Thank you very much. First and second, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you very much. That passes. That brings us to Cam. You have the executive director report and 1 minute to give it.
Yep, I do. Timing. Most of it is already in the document there. Nick did ask for any additional volunteers for the finance and audit committee. So if anybody is interested in that, please take a note, make a note in the chat room. Susan asked earlier of if there were any additional volunteers for our Utah policy monthly submissions. So if anyone is interested in volunteering there, please note it in the chat room as well. Neither of those are mandatory, but they are volunteer options for you. Within the executive director report, you'll see that I gave an update on COVID and on the election. We will be sending a thank you letter to every member of the legislature later this month. Officers, I just need a thumbs up, and you can even do that right now on the screen that you're good with your signatures on that letter to thank them for the collaboration between the state and local governments. That we are one of the few states in the country where cities and counties receive the full 45% of the CARES Act. Because of the election results, there is now a better than zero chance of additional federal stimulus. So you're welcome for that stunning analysis, better than zero. The incoming administration has pledged support for a new stimulus package. Whether or not that'll have state and local government money in it is still up in the air, but we're working closely with the National League of Cities to make sure we're having that conversation. The incoming administration has also prioritized transportation infrastructure funding, as well as wanting to look at housing policies. So I think cities are going to be front and center when the new administration starts in January with the new Congress. We mentioned the 2021 logistical challenges we're going to have in the upcoming legislative session. The good news, though, from COVID is that the annual convention ended up costing us less money than it normally does, and still recruited about the same number of people who registered. So we learned some really valuable lessons there. And most importantly, all but 2 sponsors stuck with us this year. We're very, very pleased about that. We will be sending letters of gratitude to them as we seek to continue their sponsorship into 2021. And we are working toward an in-person conference at the Dixie Center for mid-year in the spring. Last thing is that December 7th and December 14th are going to be big days. I know I'm past the 1 minute mark. Sorry, Mayor Caldwell, I just saw that on my phone too. But on December 7th, the league officers and I will be meeting with the editorial boards of the Tribune and Deseret News to talk about land use, police, and other issues. So officers, watch for a doodle poll later today for a quick 30-minute prep meeting the week after Thanksgiving, so we can coordinate the message for the editorial boards. And then on December 14th at the next board meeting, you'll review the audit. We will also thank Governor Herbert in person at the beginning of LPC that afternoon. So the officers and I will stream a portion of LPC from up there so that we can thank him. In the meantime, though, we do request that you fill out the different surveys that we're sending to you for your feedback for the governor-elect, as well as for the upcoming 2021 session, and let us know if anyone is interested in participating with Utah Policy or serving on the Audit and Finance Committee. Last but not least, with Thanksgiving coming up, I would be remiss if I didn't say thank you to all of you for your service, not just to the league, but to your communities. And thank you to my staff as well. It's been a challenging year, but when I look back on 2020, I'm very proud and pleased with what collectively we've accomplished. So thank you to everyone.
Thanks, Cam. I appreciate that. And we are all very grateful for you and your staff and thankful for everything that you do to make our jobs easier. And I'm thankful, I would agree, and to all of those serving the state in these elected positions. This has not been a normal year and everybody has weathered. I had Mayor Wilson one time, Ted Wilson, tell me, I think I met with him a couple of years after I'd been in the position, and he said, how many years you been in the job? I said, oh, I think about 2 or I think it was 2.5 at the time. He said, no. Those go by in dog years. You need to take way more credit for the amount of time and energy and effort that's gone into being a public servant. And certainly in this last year, that applies more than any other. So Cam, I appreciate that. And we appreciate everybody on this call for everything that you do. I have number 10, ULCT board and commission reports and appointments. Is Abby willing to do that real quick?
Yes, I will make this super quick because I know we're going over time. So we just have one appointment. It's for the Joint Highway Committee. So Ryan Snow, he was the Roosevelt city manager. He left Roosevelt. He's with another city now. So the Roosevelt city recorder and finance director, Kurt Maurer, he would like to fill that position. So we just need board approval for that, and then we can move forward from there. He has 12 years experience, as you can see, with municipal finance and with different grant programs. I have his resume and statement of interest if anyone wants to see that, but we would approve that. We can do that.
Any questions or comments? Hearing none, we would accept a motion to approve. Did you say Ryan Snow?
So Ryan Snow, he had
Kurt Maurer.
Yeah, so it's Kurt now.
We would accept a motion to approve Kurt Maurer.
So moved. This is Jewel.
Thanks, Joel.
This is Miley. I can second that.
Okay, we have a first and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, that passes. Thank you, Abby. We appreciate that. Number 11, do we have any other business? Hearing none, again, we'll say thank you for your attendance today, for everything you do for our state and your communities. We appreciate you. And with that, we'll go ahead and adjourn. Thank you all very much.
Well done, President.
Thank you.
Cam, good day, everybody.
Right? About the letter that you're sending to
Sorry, Mary Ramsey, one more time.
you needed a thumbs up about the letter you're sending to legislators?
Yep. So I saw thumbs up from others, and that I saw Gary Hill give me a nondescript look on his face, which I took to be a yes.
Even if it was the stink eye? Okay, good.
Have a great day, everybody.
Yeah, there you go, Gary. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Perfect, everybody. See you at LPC. All right.
Thanks, everyone.